Hello, everyone. Ooh. Hello, hello, hello. Yes, thank you all for coming. It's a full house, which is very pleasing to see. This event is organized in collaboration with Queer History Month, so there's going to be event the entire month at different locations. I recommend you go check out the website if you are interested in learning more about queer history. And it's also organized by us, SPUI 25, or SPUI 25, and SPUI 25 in SPE in particular. SPUI 25 in SPE is the youth editorial board of SPUI 25, and we try to make events that speak to our generation and center young voices or unheard voices. We have an event coming up after this one, a bit later in the month, about untold stories in journalism, especially around the Gaza war and the silencing of Palestinian journalists. So I recommend you check that out as well. My name is Leo. I'm a social scientist, and I studied medical anthropology and sociology at the University of Amsterdam. And my research was about gender as a medical object, so researching the people who research gender. And that led me to sort of look at gender clinics as, you know, one of the sites where knowledge about gender is produced. And there's surprisingly little non-medical work about gender clinics and about gender-affirming medicine. There's little, but there's not none of it. There's one Dutch scholar who is in the room with us tonight, Bakker, who has really been a pioneer in writing about this history, transgender history in the Netherlands, but also the history of the VU Gender Clinic in particular, for example. So we are really honored to have Alex talk to us tonight. Yes, I think we're all aware that we're in a climate where there's a lot of politicization of this form of medicine and of healthcare and of access to healthcare. And often the voices that are, you know, at the forefront of public discourse are not experts, are not scholars. They are mostly people who have no idea what they're talking about. So I think this event is also an opportunity for us to listen to people who actually know what they're talking about. So yes, without further ado, I would like to welcome Alex on stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. Can I take one of these? Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yes, thank you very much. Very honored to be here to get this organization or invitation to talk about this subject with a rather roaring title, The Birth of the Gender Clinic, over 100 years of gender-affirming care. I think that's perhaps suggests a bit too much, but it's good to start off like that. I'm a freelance historian, which means I'm not connected to a university. Also means a bit that my work, I try to also reach a more general audience. So I'm perhaps not that academically apt as perhaps many of you. Anyway, this subject about over 100 years ago, which took place in Berlin, is a very fascinating theme, a very fascinating time in history. And I dove into it. And I hope to finish my book about it, or to publish the book, I hope the end of the year. It will be a mixture of history, writing of history, and more towards sort of a novel, so literary non-fiction, I would call it. Well, starting off, where's the clicker? Yeah. The history I want to talk to you about, or I want to share with you now, is, as I said, very fascinating, but also quite complex. And some lines in history are rather clear and more or less easy to follow. Some are not. So there will be points probably in my talk where I say we really don't know exactly how and what was happening there. But we'll try in this half hour to get through this. First, we need some context, of course. And the title says 1919 until 1933. I will talk also a bit more before the year 1919. But why did we choose this year is because of the opening of this Institut. Institut für Sexualwissenschaft. Institute of Sexology would be the best way to translate it into English. It was opened in 1919, directly after the First World War, when in fact Germany was in a rather ruined state. And it was opened, as you see here, or you see it better on the last one. Quite a nice building, used to be sort of a villa in the heart of Berlin, in Tiergarten, near the Reichstag. But if you want to find it now, it's almost impossible, because it was destroyed during the Second World War through heavy bombings, and the streets that were there, as they were back then, you cannot find them anymore, really. If you want to know exactly where it is marked someplace, but it's unfortunately we cannot visit the building anymore. Well, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was the big leader, the big man behind all of this, it was also his money with which he started this institute, said at the opening speech, this is a place for 4 topics, 4 pillars. It's a center for research, scientific research, a center for education for various targets group, sexual education, a center for care, meaning an outpatient clinic. I'll come back to these 4 items in a while. And a center of refuge, Zuflucht in German, Zuflucht in Dutch. You could translate it as what we perhaps now would say safe space. Hirschfeld, you see him here, at that time is around 50 years old. He is quite a well-known name in Germany. He is known for his activities in the emancipation struggle for homosexual rights. He's also known as a pioneer in this very new field of sexology. He's one of the leading forces in that. And this field, this new discipline, tries to study and gather knowledge and insights into all aspects, various aspects of human sexuality. Among them also, there's quite a focus on the so-called deviant sexual issues, like back then it was called deviant still homosexuality, gender diversity, but also more what they used to call the pathologies like BDSM and fetishism, etc. Hirschfeld himself is homosexual, but he, well, like all scientists and activists at that time, or almost all, that remains a secret. He wants to keep that a private matter because of he wants to avoid the impression of doing this, all this work for self-interest. Also, and by the way, you see him here with his young lover and assistant who also worked at this institute, who was really the central figure within this institute, who was he was the leader of the archive. He did lots of lectures, and he more sort of hold the place together. His much younger lover, Carl Giese, but Hirschfeld regarded the personal perspective as secondary to the scientific perspective. So for that reason, he remained officially in the closet, but again, back then that was quite, well, you could say, common to do so. Of course, in their own circles, everybody knew. The idea of science as the number one thing that matters most, that is very central to Hirschfeld. You could define him by this motto, per scientiam ad justitiam, Latin for through science to justice. Hirschfeld was also one of the founders of the how do I translate this into English? Wissenschaftliches Humanitäres Komitee, so the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, sort of, which also had department or an organization here in the Netherlands, was quite vital for the history of Dutch homosexual emancipation. And their main goal was to fight against the fact that homosexuality was an illegal activity in German law. It was the infamous, probably you heard of this, paragraph 175. And you see here that there was lots of publications about it. The thing on the right is like a petition. So there was a continuous struggle within his work. So the scientific Pertientium ad justitium, that's really central to his work. And so the four pillars of the Institute, you remember, first the science as a goal. Science, well, not just for science sake, but again, for the sake of change, of emancipation, of the getting of rights. And back then, homosexuality and gender diversity was seen as a moral sin from religious points of view, or as a perversion, more from a psychiatrical point of view, like a mental disorder. And the people at the Institute tried, by all means they could think of, to find scientific, biological causes for homosexuality, in their belief that that would bring change. Hirschfeld and his colleagues are convinced that the main factor with the existence of homosexuality and gender diversity is that it lies particularly in the gonads, the internal sex organs. And they, in their thinking, produce an internal secretion, in German innere Sekretion, that causes males and females. That causes masculinity and femininity. I'm putting it a bit simpler now than they wrote about it, but that is basically what it boils down to. The word, it comes close to hormones, as we now know sexual hormones, but he used another word for it, and there are some differences. The concept of hormones only came about a bit later in the 30s and 40s. But one of the reasons is that differences in these inner secretions, in these glands, disturbances as they called it, those are responsible for the existence of homosexuals. So it is still seen as something abnormal or abnormal. We'll get to the importance or the difficulties of language later on perhaps, but that is the way they explain it. But the main step they take is to search for the biological causes instead of a moral or psychiatrical ones. They research within a department of scientific research all kinds of other things, all kinds of physical traits, for instance, body height, fingers. They do blood tests in their own blood labs. All things try to find differences and find explanations. They evolve because they put up hypotheses and then they have to reject them, etc., etc. But the search is very, very focused on all kinds of physical traits. Then the second part, education, as I called it, education for the professional field, for students, for doctors, because sexology is such a new field, but also for the general public. That's very important to the Institute, giving free sexual education for all. The level of knowledge among the population was very low, so they make lots of effort to change that, to embetter that, to improve the level of knowledge. And from 26 on, there's a weekly question night for everybody who wants to come. It's free, and there's a box in the hall, place to put in your questions anonymously, and then they get, during the break, the experts read that and try to come up with answers. Also, part of education, the Institute has a very extensive library on a highest level of everything that is published around the world. So it's really a center of expertise as well. There's a sexuological archive with a collection, an amazing collection. It must have been, it's all destroyed, but must have been amazing, with lots of ethnographical examples of sexuality from other cultures around the world. But the most impressive thing, that's at least what lots of people from the audience think, is the museum. They created a beautiful museum, which is becomes very popular. Also with tourists, it becomes like a tourist attraction, which is a good thing because it lures lots of people to this institute, and that maybe that they come because they find it very thrilling, or it's a sensationalistic approach. But the hope is, of course, by getting others people inside the institute, that they really learn about the differences in sexuality and perhaps even the beauty of sexuality. There's lots of things to see, erotic prints, all that, most of that is gone as well, of course. Erotic prints, a collection of dildos from around the world, intersex organs, like medical stuff put on formaldehyde, fetishistic objects, mesmerizing to the audience. Then the third pillar, healthcare. This is, of course, where we later on come to the gender clinic, or the clinic. Giving direct sexological care for people is very important, and most of them come for two reasons. One is contraception, so ways to not get pregnant, and venereal diseases. After the First World War, there's a lot of that going around, so that's their first focus. Queer people come mostly for help and advice. You see on the right there, Department for mental suffering, if you translate Abteilung für seelisches Leiden. And those who have no money don't need to pay. So Hirschfeld is also, he comes from this tradition of sort of left-wing or social democratic reformers. So they're not out here to make money. And this outpatient clinic, in the first year alone, already gets 3,500 visitors. That's quite a lot. Which half of which cannot pay, so those were free, because they registered everything. 2/3 of them were men, 1/3 women, or at least according to the official registration. And from those 3,500, around 1,000, so you could say 1/3, falls into this category of homosexual transvestite, or as they called it back then, hermaphrodites. So, very important feature of this institute, the healthcare. Here you see sort of an ad. Then the fourth pillar, the refuge, the safe place for gay men, lesbian women, bisexual persons, transvestites. I'll come back to talking more about this word later on. For mutual support, for social gatherings, for having talks, listening to lectures, listening to music, films. Well, you can imagine the way that went down. It becomes a center of the emancipation struggle back then in the 20s in Berlin, but not the only one. There are other places. Anyhow, lots of nightlife will evolve during the 20s, gay, queer nightlife, but also other emancipational organizations, and not all are in agreement so much with this institute. There are some disputes. There are some mainly homosexual male groups who don't like the ideas that Hirschfeld is proclaiming about the nature of gender and sexual diversity. I'll come back to that. Okay, so this was the context of this institute. We now know what it stands for, and Hirschfeld, as I said, was quite well known, so he didn't work below the radar. He wanted to make his work public and publicly known, and he was very well known in Germany. And he was also often ridiculed by opponents, or worse, even physically attacked. So he was a target, you could say. Okay, so now I'll get back to the transvestism. I must take a step back to around 1900 when Hirschfeld, in his younger years, started studying this subject. He was fascinated by it. You see here a brochure that was published in 1903. It says in German what the people should know about the third sex. Now, this term third sex is a bit confusing because it can refer to queer in general, homosexual, lesbian. It can also refer to transness, to trans people. Hirschfeld uses lots of terms at the same time. So, at least, well, what we do know is that he did study the phenomenon of what we now would call transgender, apart from those others, like homosexuality. He is even one who invents the term transvestism, in German Transvestitismus. The word trans, well, you know what trans means. And then vestitism comes from the word for clothing, like the word vestiaire. He publishes a book he calls Die Transvestiten, the transvestite, already around 1910. And, well, to understand this word, you need to realize back then that clothes, your choice in clothing back then was much more significant and had much more impact than it has today. So putting on the clothes of the other sex, the opposite sex, had much more impact and send out a message to the world more than it would today, although you could argue that still when men put on dresses there is some sort of signal to the world. But anyhow, it because of the meaning of clothing and appearances, this word transvestite can mean things that we now tend to differentiate more. It's like a container or a catch-all term. But at the same time, this is also exactly what Hirschfeld himself notices, that for some people it means, or for people it can mean different things. And for some of them, it's not so much about the clothing. It is much more about the body, about the whole being, about the mental state. And for some reason, he doesn't think of a new or other term, but he keeps to this word transvestite, but adds it with total or extreme transvestites. And that term, yeah, it sounds a bit funny, but he did, that's what it was. Well, that comes close to what we would now call people with gender dysphoria, or trans people. About these clothing, you see here an example. And here, this is one of my favorite pictures. It was forbidden to go out in public in the clothes of the opposite sex. That was something that was in German law. We also had similar laws in the Netherlands and other Western countries as well. But in Germany, this was the case, so it meant that it was quite dangerous to go out in public dressed in the clothes of your liking. Because of Hirschfeld, of his belief in science being sort of the liberator of all things, he opens up conversation with the Berlin police. They are surprisingly open to this, and together they make this deal where it becomes clear that for the people that Hirschfeld can give sort of a certificate who are under his treatment or observation, he can say, this is a transvestite that has this condition and has this need to dress in those in the clothes, and it has nothing to do with being a public nuisance, because that was why there was such a law, and the police go along with that. They are very open to his beliefs and his view on this, and so they come up with this transvestiten Shine's passport, transvestite passport. You see here on the right the medical note, and this belongs to Gerd Katter, and this is the note the police can't hardly read it, but this is his official pass he took with him at all times, and this is close-up of Gerd. This is in 28, by the way. My book will be partly also about him and about somebody else. I'll introduce her later on. So it is, I think, somewhat of a revolutionary step to at least get this freedom in life, because that means you can dress the way you want to at home and in public. But even if you are the happy, or not so happy, but at least the owner of such a pass, some people want more and want to have their gender officially registered as male or female. And that's not so easy as Hirschfeld had hoped. So it doesn't work out the way he thought he could convince the judges, because that had to do with the judges in the court. And he realizes he needs to build a more solid base. And his belief in this scientific reasoning leads him to give a place for transvestism within his theories. Two things are important here. The theory of the Zwischenstufen, that's sexual intermediates, and his concept and experience with intersex, then called hermaphrodism. For both, I need to take this again a step back in time. The sexual intermediaries or sexual intermediates, sexuelle Zwischenstufen, basically comes down to the theory of Hirschfeld that all of human nature has a seemingly infinite number of possible variations in gender differences. Only at the outskirts, how do you call that? The extremes are, for instance, 100% masculine and 100% feminine, but all rest is somewhere in between. And each person has a unique composition of characteristics of masculinity and femininity based on individual hormones, word hormones I'm using now, and genetics. So it's a spectrum model instead of a binary model. This is, however, a theoretical framework, and in practice, the focus of this theory is more aimed at the more visible, quite visibly different from the average intermediate forms. And within that, this is where the concept of transvestism arises. He sees four groups: people who are intersex because of their sexual organs, people who are intersex or androgynous because of other things like, for instance, hair growth for born females or breasts for born males. And the third group would be homosexuals, lesbians, and then the fourth within this model, within this theory, are transvestites. The four groups are interrelated, he says, and again, all is caused by these hormones. There is some criticism to, I'm putting it a bit simple, but this is basically the reasoning behind the sexual intermediates. Here you see, this is a photograph of a wall in a museum in the Institut, and here are all kinds of pictures of transvestites, as he calls them. It reaches quite a public reach and acceptance. There's also some criticism, but it becomes sort of a paradigm. The other factor, other concept that was important for his idea to help trans emancipation is the notion of intersex. You see here Hirschfeld with a patient. This is a publication from a book. The thing with intersex is that it was although very rare, it was a well-known thing among the medical professional field, with an acceptance to it, that nature does bring forth children who are intersex. And that if they want to and need to, and for instance are divided in the wrong category, male or female, that they have a right later on to change that. Well, Hirschfeld is one of the experts in Germany who can give his opinion on that. In a case, a particular, or a case when somebody decides to take it up at the judge saying, I was put in this category of male and but I feel like a female, and this is my intersex condition. Hirschfeld was one of the leading experts. He has to deal with a law that says what determines whether you're male or female are the internal sex organs. And he is absolutely not agreeing with that. He thinks, he reasons the only thing that counts is a psychological function and emotional function. And literally in one of his writings he says, in English, in German, we have no right to say to someone who wants to be a woman, you are a man, or to order someone who wants to be a man to remain a woman. Well, that comes quite close to what we would call gender identity. So this is where his concepts and his thinking leads him to, is this notion of mental or psychological hermaphroditism, or you could say intersexuality of the mind. So, people whose bodies show no visible intersex characteristics, but who have the nature of the opposite sex in their whole being. This makes it easier for other professionals and people of authorities to accept this notion. So he also calls it in German Seelenzwitter, that's like intersex of the soul. This approach in helping people who want to change their sex with the registration, based on this reasoning, indeed, that does work. There's a number of, well, sorry, let me see. In 1918, so this is even before the Institute was present, he had used this approach for the court for 20 trans people, and only in three cases this was disallowed. So it was you could say a successful concept that comes quite close to what we now call gender identity and transgender identity. By the way, in terms of language, still it is used, female transvestite is used for trans men, and male homosexual or transvite is used for trans women. So in terms of language, it for us feels very outdated. So for trans people, who don't know yet that they have a name like that, trans people, but still, that is more or less a situation when the Institute opens. There is this transvestite pass. People who want to change their sex for the official registrations can perhaps do that with the help they need, but there are no hormones yet, there is no physical treatment, and surgical procedures is something that Hirschfeld definitely is not in favor of. And then we come to this person, Dora, the one of the two main characters of my new book, so I really dove into her story. She seeks help at the Institute. She knows very well that she is a woman, a girl in a male body, and she comes after she finds out that this Institute exists. She goes there with a very clear demand or desire is to get rid of her male genitalia, to become a woman. that's a little too direct for Hirschfeld and his colleagues. They don't go along with that very easily, but they are fascinated by her and by her very clear story. And they offer her a place to stay, because she came from the countryside. She went to Berlin with absolutely no money. So she could stay at the Institut, live in the basement and help out in the kitchen. And in return, they offered her treatment, being, well, first talking, coming under observation of the psychiatrist. And fortunately, we have, and you see her here helping as a kitchen maid on the right. And of course, the good thing for her is the moment she enters the door there, she is allowed to dress the way she feels and to present herself as Dora. We have, luckily for me and for you, there's a PhD that was written about her. And it contains loads of information, because the PhD candidate has written out all of the talks Dora had with the other doctors, and also the questionnaire she had to fill in when she started. The thing is, her case gets to be taken very seriously. And in the end, the doctors do decide to comply with her desire for surgery. I think because she is very insistent, also because she makes it very clear that this is the last resort for her, and otherwise she will commit suicide. And you can read in this PhD that also the way things change, the insights they have into the matter are evolving, have evolved, and the PhD candidate, Werner Holtz, a young doctor, is convinced that Dora needs and is entitled to this surgery. Hirschfeld goes along with that, the other doctors go along. And then a logical question would be, this one first. Logical question, of course, is, was she the first one? And that's where things get a bit complicated. I'm hesitant to say this Dora Richter is the first trans person in history who did a physical transition. Like some people still think Lily Alba was the first, but that is definitely not the case. But strangely and very interestingly, we have a source that in 1912, a trans man was already operated upon. He got a mastectomy and a hysterectomy. But this was not perceived back then by the performing surgeon or by anybody else as revolutionary or even as something noteworthy, let alone gender-affirming. It was referred to mere as the removing of body parts that made her uncomfortable. So it's more defeminizing. But this was not really ever picked up. And I would argue that this is the first we know of a transgender surgical procedure that has taken place. Yeah, not in this institute because it didn't exist, but from a doctor who also helped in other occasions there. So it was definitely Berlin. Then there are occasional reports of castration, so the first step in gender surgery here for trans women, that took place. But the difference with this case of Dora, and that's why it is still very important, is that the things I just told were very below the radar, very occasional, and or occasional, how do you say that? Very not random, but well, either way. The difference is with this case, it starts an era of a certain degree of openness, transparency about it, and that there's a paradigm shifting here. Until this point, it had been a handful of operations, like I said, on individual cases. But now things are changing, and they want to seriously explore more what this option of surgical intervention means to the people involved. So they're opening themselves up to a treatment where a treatment vision in which the body is adapted to the mind and not the other way around. And they are going to publish about it. Not much, but still. And another thing is that this is the first time where a very clear distinction is made towards homosexuality, because these things until now also got intertwined a lot in their writings. Castration, as I said, so removing of the testicles, but Dora wanted to get rid of her male genitalia. The surgeon refuses to do a penectomy, so he refuses to remove the penis, much to Dora's regret. The surgeon says that he feels the risks are too high, and he has experienced a few times with other cases that the need to have this penis removed disappears as soon as the castration has taken place. And in the writings, we can read that in his PhD, he says he's sure, very sure, that the desire of Dora to have the penis gone will also diminish. As I said, this was an important step, and it had impact. It led to more operations like these. In 1926, already 8 cases of surgery like this were known, including 6 trans women, like Dora, and trans men, in whom the ovaries and uterus were removed. It is important, but still these are very small steps, very limited numbers, and the topic, they do write about it, but not that much. But in the years that follow, towards the end of the 20s, the number of trans patients continue to rise, and gradually for the center, for the Institute, it becomes an expertise. And a new psychiatrist, Felix Abraham, devotes lots of his time to this, and he's also very active in helping setting up a patient organization for transvestites. Berlin itself, you probably know these images, meanwhile, especially so from 27, 28 becomes this turmoil of trans and queer life with lots of places to go, much more even than today in Berlin. Lots of magazine publications. Seems like a magical time. I think we shouldn't romanticize it too much, because it's only for a limited circles in Berlin, but still it was there. And it did build up this subculture with lots of magazines as well. And you see on the left somebody who outed mostly as transvestite, but you could argue that it looks more like this person, Lotte Hahn, nowadays would identify it as butch, or, well, that's a whole other discussion, but again, that shows how complex things were and are. And here's in the middle again, you see Gert Gatter, who I feel safe to say that I would refer to him as a trans man. I'm running a bit late, but I'm getting to the very last part. So this is end of the 20s. There's this rise in self-confidence around matters referring to trans, outside the Institute, inside the Institute, within the doctors, within the community itself. And remember the doctor who refused to remove the penis from Dora, saying Dora, she won't mind. Well, she did mind, and she kept asking and asking about that. And in the end, after a few years, starting in 1930, 31, the doctors feel confident enough to take the, to deal with the risks, the medical risks that are involved, although I don't think I asked this plastic surgeon, then he said, well, the risks aren't that high. It's more a matter of if you want to perform the surgery or not. At least that's what they're doing now. So within the Institute, preparations are made for what we call the vaginoplasty. And this is really revolutionary, because that hasn't been done before we think, we're not even sure about that, but we do have some evidence here. First patient being on the right, our daughter, and two others. I won't get too technical about it. I can if you want to, but for time reasons, I'll keep it a bit short. We unfortunately, we don't know that much about how they experienced it, 5 years later. We do know a bit from the perspective of the surgeons. Felix Abraham wrote an article about it, very short, but at least we now know what they did technically, for those who find that interesting. And in the media also an article was published. And then there's a strange thing. There's a movie that was made in Austria in 1933. Very strange movie. I won't even try to tell you the story of it, because it is about sexually interesting things. But, and it gets censored very quickly. It is already 1933. It's in Austria, but it gets censored there. In Germany, it's not even screened. But I want to show you a clip from it.
Wir sehen hier 3 Personen, die ihrer Kleidung gemäß Frauen zu sein scheinen. Tatsächlich aber handelt es sich um 3 Männer, die infolge ihrer seelischen Einstellung seit ihrer Geburt weibliche Neigungen besaßen und über ihren Wunsch auf operativen Wege zu Frauen wurden. Diese 3 Großaufnahmen ihrer Gesichter lassen namentlich bei der links mit Zwicker gezeigten noch deutlich den ursprünglichen männlichen Typ erkennen.
I'll stop it here because now we get very graphic pictures of the vaginas in question. If you want to see it, I can show it, but I think we'll better go on. I don't know if anybody understood the German that was said. They're saying basically very judgmental things about women, men who turned into women, and that you can really still see that with some of them. And they're judging among the 3 of them. So I'm coming to the end, which was also the end of the Institute. The Nazis, of course, in 1933 take over, and one of the very first places they go to ransack, to destroy, is the Institute, for propaganda reasons. That shows you the significance of this Institute, the symbolic value as well. They use that in the propaganda as well to show them this is what we're getting rid of in our new Aryan Germany. We don't need this homosexual, left-wing Jewish swines, literally, those are the texts. They destroy the place. They burn the books they find, they collect. You probably know those images of the burning of the books, May 10, 1933. Upon a few years ago, I didn't know that about 75% of the pile of the books was from this institute. So you can see the direct link here in everything the Institute stood for: the personal freedom, sexual freedom, the acceptance of being different. Well, I don't need to tell you, was what the Nazis wanted to destroy. And with this depressing note, I'm ending my lecture.
Thank you very much, Alex, for this very insightful lecture. And now we'll be joined on stage by 2 other speakers to reflect on the lecture and share some insights from their own work. The first is Tobi Lakmaker. Tobi is a... You can come up, yeah. Tobi is a writer. He contributes a weekly column in the Volkskrant. I really recommend reading the one published last weekend, I think it was. Yeah. It's really good. And his debut novel, The History of My Sexuality, or De Geschiedenis van mijn seksualiteit, was critically acclaimed and is now been translated into 13 languages and counting, you know. So we're very happy to have you with us tonight. And then last but not least, we have Tammie Schoots here with us. So Tammie is a writer and freelance journalist. She writes mainly about topics related to gender, queerness, and radical right politics. And coincidentally, she recently published a piece in One World that sort of discusses the end of the Institut and the Nazis burning books and burning these archives and making parallels with the situation we find ourselves in today. So yeah, I'm going to sit down. So yes, maybe we can start this conversation with Tammie presenting us a bit of her piece and her writing and the connection with these images and the situation today.
Yeah, so my piece goes on where the lecture has ended. So I wrote an article for One World magazine. It was called 90 years after the first Nazi book burning, gender and sexuality are still a target. And there I chronicle how radical right ideology interacts with gender. And there are two main takeaways from the articles, which I want to hand to you guys. So if you're going to debate your apolitical family members, you can kind of, we all have them, at least I do. So the first element is an ideological argument, which is social Darwinism. And social Darwinism, you probably have heard it in Andrew Tate podcasts as, as survival of the fittest. So it actually means that certain groups in society dominate other groups by the sheer fact that they are seen as innately better. And that was a similar argumentation that the Nazis used when they attacked Hirschfeld's gender clinic. They said the Latin phrase, suprema lex salus populi. And in a very free translation, that means something as the health of the people needs to be prioritized. And the relation of trans people towards that social Darwinism is pretty obvious. They were seen as deficiencies. They were contrasted with the cisgender body and seen as these deviations which make the people sick. So that's why they were targeted. And that is also an argumentation we still see today. I don't know if any of you guys also follow the news, but recently, well, we all have to. I'm making this very funny. It was not very intense. Well, recently, Donald Trump has fired trans people in the military. Like, whatever you think about militarization, the argumentation he made was that it was against an honorable life. So he was kind of tapping into the same social Darwinist sentiments that the Nazis also used. And before I go to the second element, an interesting caveat is, I think many of you probably have once wondered, why is it always liberals who go from liberalism to the radical right, to the extreme right? That's precisely because of this ideology, social Darwinism. So one of the main thinkers behind laissez-faire market ideology, Herbert Spencer, he also legitimized the privatization of society exactly because of social Darwinism. The idea that some individuals can kind of take more, are stronger than others, and accumulate more wealth and should be allowed to do so. The main difference being that liberals go from individuals and fascists go in groups. But there's a very tight ideological line, which is very interesting. Beware of your liberal family members. Sorry. So a second element, just in all seriousness, a second element is just very practical, because this was not only a gender clinic, this was also a place of education. So the people who worked at the gender clinic would go out into the city and educate other people about gender, about sexuality, and it also made them a main target for the Nazis, because these people were spreading those ideas. These were accumulating more public favorability. And I think that is something we do also see today. I think many of you know the week van de lentekriebels, the week of the spring chickens, where in the whole of the Netherlands, all primary schools are getting educated on sexual and gender diversity. And that was also extremely scrutinized by our extreme right parties in parliament. So we see these kind of historical repetitions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I think something you really put your finger on is and that sort of resonate with what Alex ended the lecture with, is the importance of these stories, the importance of these archives, the importance of having these documents present and disseminated to the population, and how radical right politics and fascism suppress that and sort of literally burn these books or makes these voices unable to speak in public. And I think we also see a worrying trend with universities and self-censorship in research and the cutting of funding related to, those more progressive matters of DEI and whatnot. And so that got me thinking about what other strategies we could adopt to sort of preserve this knowledge and preserve these voices. And literature actually could potentially be quite valuable in that. And Alex, you also mentioned that your next book is going to be sort of fictionalized. And in your own writing, Tobi, I think, so for those who, no spoiler, but Tobi's book, The History of My Sexuality, sort of goes over Sophie's first experiences with sex and relationships and all of their questioning with identity and sexuality. But I think this book really captures a moment that a lot of people in our generation go through, which is this questioning and this sort of like exploring. And in that sense, it has a lot of politics in it, because it captures these events that people are trying to suppress or to invisibilize. And I was wondering if this is something you were conscious about writing this book, sort of the political weight of your literary writing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, actually, while writing, I absolutely didn't think of this, of my writing as political. I think I was aware of like some fragments of the book being, not necessarily political, but like I was aware that this main character has an opinion on quite some things, and also some political subjects, but no, I think I just, it sounds a bit simple, but wanted to write the most, nice or beautiful book I could. So I didn't think of my book in those terms, but when it was published, I was, surprised in the first instance, and later on a bit shocked about the way it was perceived sometimes. Because it was sometimes very, like the fact that I changed my name during the months after my publication, combined with the fact that it has the title, The History of My Sexuality, was for some people, reason to, only see it as something political or something that is confined to the subject of being trans, which is something you can, which is totally okay to write a book about, but it was never, I didn't think about my book in this own way, so I was, a bit shocked about that, and I think it also influenced the thinking about, of course I want to write a new book, and I'm trying to do that, and I was a bit hesitant to write about gender again, actually, because the same people who were confining my first novel to the theme of trans genderism were also the people who are the most stupid about being trans. So I was very hesitant. I didn't know if I had like the, I'm not sure what's English for draagvlak, but like yeah, like the mental ability to sport.
Support.
Oh, support. Okay.
Personal draagvlak.
Yeah.
Sports.
Okay. I was actually inclined to write about other stuff first because I didn't know if I could like take on this discussion with the media again. But I notice now, like the better I'm feeling, the more I think, okay, maybe. Yeah, because of the position we as trans people find ourselves in today, it will be, everything I say will be political to a certain extent, and I'm maybe also happy to do that. I'm not, because I think, this is the last thing I'll say about it, but I first I was a bit frightened, like I want to be seen as some universal writer, and if I'm going to talk about gender too much, they will not see me as universal. And then I realized like that's such a depressing thought, and I would rather write books for people like you and like people, young people, than like this reviewing journalist people from newspapers who decides what is the it's clear, right, what I'm saying? Yeah,
Totally.
So this has been my those have been my thoughts about if it's political or not, what I write.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And Alex, yourself, like now using sort of fiction as an element of historical inquiry, it is not something we're used to, at least that I'm used to in historical research, which is sometimes quite dry and like, focused on documents and pure evidence. How do you feel about that? And is that something you reflect on like sort of diversifying the sources, especially in the context where the archives and these like primary sources have been burned?
I'm not sure about it. I just found when I started diving into this subject that I wanted to do it differently than the books I'd written before, which I hope they're not dry, but still they are just history, books of history. And I had written more of a literary book about a bit similar to your book, but very different, less literary, but still about my own personal life and background. And I wanted to combine the insight and the level of emotionality you can get through literature within a historical context. So what I do in this book is I follow, as I told you, the lives of these two trans people, and then I try to explain what happened to them. So for instance, what I just shared with you, the way Dora gets responded to. Why do the doctors say the things they said to her, and why do they do that and not that? And how does that all change? So then, because the history itself is so compelling and fascinating, it would have been too hard also, that's a practical reason, to use that in a novel. Because then you hit boundaries very quickly in literary terms, so you cannot explain everything through the eyes of those two persons. So that's why I chose for this sort of combination of both. But I'm very happy to be writing again more on an emotional level. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to reading that book. And sort of another topic, but something that came up in your presentation, and that also came up when organizing this event, is the question of terminology, right? Because nowadays we have sort of a proliferation of terms, and a lot of these terms are great because they are apt to describe increasingly specific experiences, and people can find agency in these terms. But we also have a tendency to sort of look back at history or at other cultures, like non-Western cultures, and impose these terms on people. So like when we say, the people at the Institut were trans or they were queer, those are not necessarily terms they would have identified with, maybe, because these terms didn't exist like that. But yeah, so I think more of an open question for all of you: how do you negotiate that as writers, using those terms across?
So I'm trained as a political scientist, so I'm always coming from a background of questioning power. And I think we should definitely use these terms to describe historical figures, but not in fixed meanings, but as these discursive sites through which we are constantly in dialogue with. So I just mean that we should compare and contrast what kind of experience they had and how we kind of delineate the term today. Because I think there's a very specific danger in fixing these terms, namely the danger, and I think a lot of people have kind of seen this in our community, the danger of gatekeeping. And to elaborate, Foucault uses two ways of defining history. So on the one hand, he uses redemptive history, and that is something we kind of touched upon already, is where you kind of look in history, point towards a historical figure, say, well, they were trans, so that it is kind of evidence that we exist today. The problem with that is that we say we exist today, but who do we mean when we say we? We delineate by how we define the term today. And that is where a second type of defining history comes into play. So Foucault's second type is the curative way. So that's when we look at trans people and historical figures, we look at them as discontinuities. I've been practicing on this word. And see how their different self-identification, the elements they kind of identified with, and also the elements they didn't identify with, kind of relate to the term, to how we kind of define terms today. Because, for instance, one of the major debates in our community right now is gender dysphoria, a necessary condition to be trans. And if we fix the meanings today, then the hegemonical term of trans kind of does delineate that. But then we kind of erase a whole group of people. And we kind of also engage in this exclusion-inclusion terminology, which we were kind of criticizing. So that's, I think, a very bad way to go about. And to kind of give two examples, transgender, how we kind of know it right now, is mainly coined by Leslie Feinberg in the 90s. And she also coined it because she couldn't find herself in the two major words, transsexual and transvestism. So that is also a way to kind of relate yourself towards these historical terms. Butler also conflated queer and transgender studies, which had a lot of implications, but also a lot of value. So I feel like this curative way of kind of building upon these historical figures has a lot more value. That's my monologue. Amen.
Well, I don't necessarily have a monologue, but well, I think my experience is like, my book came out 4 years ago, and there was a trans guy from the United States that really wanted to read my book. So I sent it to him, and he said, like, because it was, I think, just after Trump took place in the White House, he said, like, this is, I'm so thankful for your book. This is something that keeps me going. And I noticed that I sort of felt ashamed because it's only been 4 years, but I'm already, ashamed now for some terms I use in my book, or some fragrance. And I mean, not necessarily ashamed when I think about the book, but I do feel like I don't know if it's worthy to be a guide of hope. Yeah, so there's like a new publication, edition coming up, and there are already some things I think I would maybe want to change, like slight things. So it's not something I would have thought before, but I also noticed then that some terms when it comes to gender and also other, identity questions are evolving very quickly. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value in what you're saying, because I think that one of the most important things right now is also introspection. I'm 30, I'm a millennial, and just the acknowledgement that you don't define the term, or that the term is fluid, and that there's a lot of new identities also kind of captured by transgender is it's very important to be conscious about, and also something I hear in you, because it's a fluid term.
Yeah, I have Gen Z friends now. I'm also a millennial, but I noticed that I'm afraid to say the word gay with them. I'm calling everyone queer. Okay, it feels more safe. I actually don't know what's up, but yeah. Well, maybe we can collectively discuss this, but sometimes I think, I'm trans, I have authority on this, but then I think, no, maybe, I don't have all the authority.
Complicated,
messy,
but that's also the beauty of it, I think, the messiness. Another point from Alex's lecture I wanted us to sort of reflect on was that you really underlined that Magnus Hirschfeld and the Institute had a very strong scientific ethos, and science and research were seen as a way of, gaining rights and gaining acceptance in society. In critical scholarship of medicine and in trans studies, queer studies, there's always been sort of a skepticism towards science and the discourse of science, and it's often depicted as pathologizing and as, as you said, fixing one particular experience of transness. But at the same time, as you showed in the presentation, and as we know in recent years, in the 90s, with the Born This Way hypothesis, it played a very strategic role in sort of gaining rights and advancing trans rights and queer rights. My question is quite vague, but it's how do you make sense of this negotiation, and what do you think is the role of science and research in trans liberation or queer liberation?
Well, if talking about Hirschfeld, the context of the times back then, where homosexuality and gender diversity was either seen as a moral sin or a perversion, it made a lot of sense to try to look at biological causes. And it's not to say that Hirschfeld was right on that, per se, but I can very much understand where his drive came from. And at that time in history, it was, I think, very strategy-wise, apart from the fact that he was a true positive believer of science. Also, that is, of course, around 1900, very much the spirit of the times. But it made a lot of sense back then, but it's always a bit complicated. I think this is a complex matter, because trans people who want or need physical transitions are depending on health carers. You cannot do it yourself. Some parts you can, but others better you don't do it yourself. So, so there is some medical interference, of course, is part of the game, and that's why this group of trans people are, in that sense, not the same as general queer people who don't need medical interventions. And you could also argue that, let's say, for instance, the whole treatment plan of puberty blockers, which I think is a brilliant concept, was developed in a medical hospital here in Amsterdam, and has made such a significant impact for the well-being of many, many young trans people over the world, that that wouldn't have happened if science was all out of the picture. So you always have to take it into account. I think that's the way I view life in general, is in what people need. And I think then there's we can see in history lots of advantages of scientific approaches and of medical research.
Yeah. Do you have a comment?
I do. For a large part, I do really agree with you. Only the thing you see now, I think, in this critical, political fascist conjuncture is the fact that it's backfiring. So what we're talking about is, of course, there was a need to kind of convince a general audience that care was needed, because it was kind of seen as this mental thing. So then you could get money. There's this interesting term by the writer Julia Serrano in her book Whipping Girl. She coins it cis-sexism, and which means something like that the trans body is always contrasted with the cisgender body. The cisgender body is normalized. And that was a way to kind of convince a general audience to give us care, because we were kind of a deficiency, we were kind of, something went wrong with us, that we had the wrong body. But now you see kind of similar argumentation used by, for instance, transgender exclusionary radical feminist TERFs, who kind of also say, you could never get this essentialized, real womanly body. So they're kind of using the similar terminology. And I think this really goes into where the progressive politics is going wrong these days, is we've kind of moved away from essentialism, which I think personally is a very good thing, but we kind of moved into self-identification. But the problem is with that narrative is that the general audience could kind of understand where we're coming from. They just want to be like me. There was kind of this power indifference between them. But now we're asking a general public to kind of accept that they're just just a kind of woman. Just like I'm a kind of woman, like they're a kind of woman. So it kind of equalizes us, but that also comes with like this broad backlash. And I feel like as progressive politics, we kind of haven't had like a very simple, intuitive answer. I'm not saying that we need it, but we're definitely losing kind of public debates because we cannot appeal to a broader audience. So that's
what do you mean with last?
Sorry?
What appeal?
We need to, because what Alex is saying, and he very pointedly kind of, he's completely right. Yeah. What the people were doing they were kind of making an argument why they should deserve care, and also maybe why the general public should pay for it, right? Mm-hmm. And they kind of try to appeal to something that cisgender people can intuitively understand. Yeah. That trans people are just something went wrong. They're just like us, but they're just born wrong. Mm-hmm. And now we haven't kind of gotten into a definition which kind of appeals in a similar manner. And I think that's why we're kind of losing the debates. I mean, yeah. Or am I making sense?
Yeah. No. Yeah, I think
it's not that fun anymore. No.
No. I think they have been saying very intelligent things already, but I could only add maybe that it's just, I mean, it's inevitable because you as you said, you need the hospitals or the experts. But I think, like most trans people know, that the hospitals or the experts aren't always using the right terms, or just terms is something specific, but it can have quite a problematic view on trans people, and a lot of people enter the hospital or their interaction with the hospital very young. And like I was, I think, 23 or 24 already when I came to the VU at first, but sorry, I have to come to my point, but there's maybe a risk because you learn to talk about yourself in dialogue with this big institute that has power over you. And especially, I mean, I was 24 and this, to a certain extent, happened to me. I thought about myself in their terms. And, I mean, I can only imagine when you're about 13 or 14 that you're such a powerless person at that point that you have, I think, very little agency to like define yourself in your own terms and not be, experience difficulties because you are, you have to do what they say, basically. You look like you want to say something.
I really want to, but I don't want to take up too much space. But I was 6 when I went to the VU, and they have because how do you test a deeply felt wish? Well, they also have something which is called the policy of disincentivizing. So they kind of let you they make you do questionnaires over and over and over and make you prove the wish to them. So that also creates this very dynamic where I feel like I've kind of taken into my adult life where you're kind of always catering to the norm. You always have to show that you are a like quote unquote real woman. I think, but that is also the major backlash we're in right now because we're saying, well, I don't want to pretend like I'm a cisgender woman. I want to be a transgender woman with everything that comes with it, but I just don't want the societal backlash from it. I don't want the 69% who says they don't want to date a trans person. The 1 in 3 Dutch people who say we don't want a Dutch, or we don't want a Dutch person, we don't want a trans person for teaching our children. I mean, so these are two narratives.
96%.
96%
Oh.
would say theoretically
only
they
met
won't
the
date
4.
a trans woman.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry.
No,
was
sorry.
not
But you know what I'm saying? So I feel like, there is this, it's kind of breaking, narrative is kind of breaking down. So I don't know what your experience was with that.
When I was younger? Maybe when I transitioned. Or
How do you kind of...
but that's ancient history. No, that's over 28 years ago, so that's a very different time than now.
Mine was also almost 28 years ago, because I'm 30 now, and I was 6 then.
Right, but this was in 1998, so so that's a different time, I guess. I'm a bit older.
Little bit.
Well, main difference back then was that trans didn't work as an identity yet. So, but coincidentally, that's also how I felt it, and I still feel it. So that's also another thing. All trans people aren't alike. There are so many differences. For me, it's not an identity. It's never been. My identity is male, and I have this trans background, which I regret, but still. But I see many differences in how people experience this. But in general terms, in my days, let's say before the year 2000, that was sort of the standard for trans people, to not see it as an identity and to never out yourself. So being invisible, anonymous was sort of the golden goal. And there was, of course, and still is, quite a difference between trans men and trans women and their role and their functioning in society. So I've always felt like trans men relatively have it easy compared to trans women in terms of what society wants from you and how you interact. And unfortunately, I think that's still the case. And I'm not sure how much has changed on that level.
And in what way? And you don't. I mean, it's also personal, so you don't have to answer. But in what way did you? You say it wasn't seen as an identity yet. But in what way did the how did the hospital? How? Jesus. Can we talk Dutch? No. Like, how was the hospital? What did you see in the approachment of the hospital? You know what I mean? Like. No. I should be able to do this. No, but you said it wasn't seen as an identity yet. Not only by myself, but also by the hospital. And in what sense did you, how did you notice that?
I think I know what you mean. That's a bit of confusion. When I say it wasn't seen as an identity, you could say post-transition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you had your transition,
Mm-hmm.
it was not a thing that you would go out in the world and say, "Hey, I'm a trans guy," or "I'm
I
a
do it
trans
all day,
woman,"
yeah.
or whatever. No, but this is quite new. This is only 20 years old or something, that it is seen as an identity you can live your life with. And in the sort of older model or concept, it was something like something you had to deal with and perhaps hopefully resolve. And then after that post-transition, you wouldn't mention that you were trans.
How was that moment for you when you were, because there's obviously been a moment where you were like, I am a trans man, and you kind of lived like openly like that. How was that moment for you, the moment you kind of did kind of be so open about it?
Well, it was in fact when I published my book in 2014, my personal autobiographical book, and I was a bit, I transitioned in 1908, and after that I was sort of anonymous about it for 14 years, which was fine, and I needed that. I needed time to build myself up, to be seen as a male, and to be in peace with it. So it was fine, but after 14 years I felt, I'm okay now. I'm not afraid anymore that somebody might recognize me or whatever. And I wanted to, like you, I wanted to write a book. And I wanted to do something with this experience. And I wanted to write a beautiful book that I thought I have to do this under, pseudonym?
Yeah.
Writer's name. But then I realized my book is all about becoming making one story of your life. As a historian, it was very hard for me because that's why the book is called My Untrue Past or My False Verleden. I made it into a version of myself that I was, in fact, basically born at the age of 30, so like an adult male, and I discarded all my past, which doesn't work. When you get older, you need your past. And well, in terms of making my whole life something whole again, I thought it's not a good idea to do this then with a writer's name. And I felt it was okay. I felt the time was there, the moment was there. And a friend of mine who was a writer also said to me, "Are you okay with yourself within your own circles, in your family and friends?" I said, "Yes, very much." I said, "Then you're fine. I need never have to care about what everybody else out there says to you." So I did it, and I have to say I didn't notice anything about that it affected me at all. Not really.
Thank you. I just want to check if we have time for one last topic. Yeah. I think, something that kind of transpired in what you just talked about is sort of a negative vision of the clinic, or at least the vision of the clinic as a reductive environment that is very much focused on, medical, clinical aspects of transness or of exploring that aspect of your identity. Well, in your lecture, Alex, you really highlighted how the Institute offered psychosocial support, housing, employment, place of refuge. I think we have the picture here. It's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a party that was given at the Institute around Christmas time, I think. No, Carnival?
It's like a masked ball. They
masked
did that
ball,
a lot. That was very popular back then.
And we see Magnus Hirschfeld holding the hand of his partner, and there are patients, there are employees, they're all together sort of celebrating. So we see that the approach to care was much more holistic and not focused purely on the sort of clinical bodily aspect of treating people, but of, seeing humans as, social beings that existed in a social context. And it seems like that's something that was lost in history. And when you look at gender clinics nowadays, they are in hospitals and they are very aseptized clinical space. Is this, or do you regret that loss? Like, do you think this is something we should bring back, or do you think sort of the community has evolved to answer to those needs in different ways, and that's good as it is?
Well, can I go first? Because it's interesting right now. In the Netherlands, there are more and more initiatives on trans health, and also some grassroots initiatives, like here at the Wallen, the red light district, catering mostly to illegal trans people or people of color, trans people of color, sex workers, and there's one in Utrecht as well. And they wanted to open one in Rotterdam, but that didn't, or the city council didn't want it. But you can see that things like that are also popping up, and they have also much more this holistic approach of helping each other in a social way, being a safe space, trying to find ways to give a full care and support each other. So that's a hopeful sign, I think.
Mm-hmm. But they remain small, and their funding remains limited, especially compared to bigger institutions.
You can go first, yeah.
So I think that there has been kind of this shift in how we define transness between Magnus Hirschfeld and one of his disciples, who was called Harry Benjamin, and who wrote the transsexual phenomena, I think in 1966. And I think it's a sign of the times where first we were kind of defining transness and a gender transition in terms of positive freedom. So creating this realm around trans people in which they could thrive, being heard, being seen, having people around you who have kind of a similar background. And I think that in the 70s, when we were applying that transsexual phenomena work of Harry Benjamin, it started to be way more defined in terms of negative freedom. So the freedom from obstacles. And to give an example, Harry Benjamin and I think his Dutch equivalent Koen van M. de Boas, they would only kind of treat you if you had chances of being passable. So meaning you could kind of walk in society without people seeing it, being free from discrimination, which is kind of freedom from obstacles. So in that sense, there's this kind of this trend in transgender healthcare, which kind of follows the major individualization, I feel like, which was also present in the 70s and 80s, just in the general public. That's my analysis of it. So, and that's why we used to have housing as intricate part of care, and now it's like, hey, we've kind of taken away all the obstacles, now it's your turn. Period.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
So I think the initiatives that you're mentioning are very, I of course support those initiatives, and I recently did a talk with my girlfriend also at I don't even know how to describe it, but it was like a trajectory for people who identified as trans. It didn't really matter, I think, where they were at in their transition, if you can define it as such. They are like going to the gym together and just hanging out, and there was such it really made me happy. I think the big difference is that it's organized by people who are trans or queer themselves, and not like, I mean, if I would imagine like the FU organized housing for me, it would sound like hell, right? I mean, no, like
I disagree, because you were very young when you got. I'm being the party pooper right now, but
no.
I disagree. I feel like that would be great for the FU to kind of connect you with places where trans people also live, where you can kind of live in a community, because a lot of people never come there because the FU says to you, well, it's an individual process, now you're done, so you're not really pushed to find like people like you, and I feel like that makes a big difference.
No, like theoretically I agree. It's just I'm really curious what the kind of how the spaces would look and the events would look that the FU would come up with. Like, I don't want to bash the FU but
you can bash the FU.
Yeah.
Who cares?
yeah, so that I would be a bit skeptical of the things they would come up with if that would really improve people's
Of
mental
course,
health.
they as an institute, I completely agree with you, but I feel like that seeing housing and care and
Yeah, of
and
course,
community
yeah.
support as an intricate part of gender care and
Yeah.
something which should be subsidized, I think that should be a
No.
very great thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
Me
when you
too.
say something that should be subsidized, you also really point the finger on the matter of capitalism and money and how
Exactly.
healthcare is organized in the Netherlands. And like
Exactly.
those are, I think there are people who are willing to organize this and to provide healthcare in that way, but just the funding is.
Exactly, and
Forgot about
usually also at great personal cost. Just so volunteering, putting a lot of their time and money and effort into it, and I feel like that should be seen as a part of care. Because sometimes I think we forget in this society is that as a trans person you don't need just to be pushed in society and hey, it's a free for all, but you need different things. You need a different realm around you. You need a different set of people. And I think that's the best advice I ever got. You can say I need something different, and now we're asking the government, we should get it.
Yeah, as a historian, I'd like to add to what you're saying now and what you said earlier, because you said with Benjamin a new concept arose, but as a historian, I have to make a nuance to that. And if we look at the early 70s, when in the Netherlands trans care started to be organized, that was basically what you're describing now. There was a high level of social help to it. Getting people housing, getting them either a job or social support was really part of the work the Gender Foundation did back then. So that's the 70s. That's the 70s in the Netherlands were, if you compare it to today, I think much more progressive than what we're facing now. And then back then it was really part of help. And I think, to my knowledge, the Netherlands were quite unique in that. I haven't seen that in other countries so much. So it did exist. But it's a sign of the times back then. So we don't have that so much anymore.
But it existed before, so it can exist again, right? It can
Well,
exist again. I think that's also like a nice.
I believe there are some very valid grassroots initiatives right now, like Trans Amsterdam as well. Community building, that people help each other. And let's hope that political times will also improve one day, where we get a bit more help from above.
Yeah. And talking about community, I think it's time to go to an audience Q&A. I think we're going to take 2-3 questions because we went a bit over time. The hosts are going to go around with a mic, and please speak into the mic because otherwise the live stream cannot hear. We're going to start there, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was fascinated by something that Alex said in his lecture, which wasn't mentioned later. Magnus Hirschfeld apparently hid the fact that he was gay himself because he was worried that it would make his work less reputatable or whatever. I'm curious how the 3 people on the stage now see that in their own work, be it as historians or journalists or writers. How do they see the public view their work knowing that they are trans themselves?
Good question. You can start.
I can start. Okay. Yeah, well, I think I maybe partly already answered it in my first, the first thing I said on stage, but yeah. So I actually went from feeling quite free because I was probably a bit naive about the way the media and maybe a broader audience in general looks at trans people. So I just wrote the book that I wanted to write. Well, which also isn't true. I think when I look back on it, I think I was maybe subconsciously, but I was aware of the fact that I was telling I think that my book contains a lot of jokes, and I think there are the humor, but also other ways of me telling about myself are subconsciously a way to make this also a nice story for the rest of them or normal people, and that's something I consciously want to. I don't want to do this again in my second book, and so maybe that's already an answer. I'll say something later, but yeah.
I do remember the time when I was afraid to come out, or not, I was never afraid, but I thought if I come out as having this trans background, then perhaps my work will be taken less seriously. But that's a long time ago that I thought that, and I had to correct myself at a certain point and say, well, no, hell no. And I've never felt that again. I think it has to do with also a certain level of self-confidence and knowing what you're doing and knowing that specifically my historical work, that I'm pretty sure of the solidity, the research I do, etc. So I'm never afraid of that being thrown at me, and if they do, I can counter it quite easily, because I think, especially in doing oral history interviews, etc., I always use it as a positive force, because I think it's easier for me to do an in-depth interview, oral history interview with somebody than if I wasn't trans myself. So I use it more like a positive thing.
Yeah, so I have a less empowering view. So for me, when I first started writing about trans identity, I also wrote a lot of personal essays, and I did a lot of interviews. And for me, it has come at a very personal and a professional loss. So, I mean, everywhere I get to write, there's always someone who's also trans, either in the magazine for the magazines I wrote for, or I interned at a newspaper, and the one who was guiding me, his son was also trans. So I do notice that I am kind of dependent on that, because otherwise people wouldn't kind of see you as a professional candidate. Like I still get a lot of invites for personal stories, but I'm also a journalist, and I do notice that I get less work from that. And I recently got a rejection. It was very brutal. It was also for a journalistic platform, and they said to me, people like you are an obstacle to journalism. Yeah, and it was, for me, it was kind of a relief, because I felt like this is like the silent thing that everybody's been thinking. But it was because the reasoning was that I would kind of use progressive terms, and that wasn't, and I would innately do that because they were kind of in the conversation we had, they were kind of saying that I would use specific kind of terms which I've never have used in any of my journalistic work. So there was kind of a preconceived notion where, because I was trans, I would kind of use certain language, and to be honest, I would use it. But I've never had, so you kind of get the point. And also on a personal thing, Alex just said it, that it's way more difficult as a trans woman, and I'm very unlucky because I like men.
I'm sorry.
It's horrible. So that's very horrible. I mean, but also a lot of my cisgender friends, because I've been living like in a cisgender world until I was 25. I also didn't know that trans people could have relationships until I was 25. And the one moment which really stuck out to me is one of my best friends. I've known her until since I was like 16 or something. And she said to me, she said, yeah, I saw something at Spuiten en Slikken, which is a television program, like progressive about drugs, and they interviewed a trans person, and you might know her. Yeah, it was that, and I get like a lot of microaggressions and a lot of kind of like, And I noticed that people treat me differently, and I don't want to be very pessimistic, but I wouldn't recommend being very open about your trans identity, especially not in this moment. Not that you shouldn't do it or accept it or not find community, do all that, but maybe trust the norm a little bit less, because they really keep telling us that they're very progressive, but in my view it's really not the case. So be very sparse with who you kind of share your queer identities, other than with the community ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I think we can
Trauma
take
girl.
one last question. One last question. Yes. Well, here in the front.
So thank you a lot. We touched a bit upon like terminology and language, and I'm always interested in how the language in which we have a certain discourse, or language in which we speak, affects the ability to express ourselves. And you just said that you're going to translate your books into a lot of languages, and I always wonder how certain languages may not have certain linguistic devices to forward terminology the same way as we might do in English. So, for example, in Turkish we don't have pronouns, but there's still a lot of different dynamics of gender. So I really wondered if now when you're translating your books, is this something you considered, and how did you go about like finding translators that would maybe be sensitive towards all these different cultural connotations that happen during translation?
Well, I think okay, because my answer to this is also a bit maybe intertwined with the last question, because I've also decided at some point to take some sort of distance or step aside from this book, because I have, maybe I was optimistic sounding in my last answer, but I've also had quite some horrible experiences with interviews, and you publish a book, you send it out to the world, and from that point on you don't have those words are your words, but the words about this book aren't yours anymore. And I've been I've been very shocked about some ways people talked about it. So I was very flattered when my book was sold to other countries, but I think at some point it was good for my mental health to just think, okay, you do you, like to my book. Although it also, of course, felt like my child, like it was very complicated, because I didn't want to let go, but I also felt like if I want to like continue as a writer and remain sane, I can't have a grip to all those things, especially when it is translated into other languages. So it's that, in combination with the fact that a lot of publishing houses in other countries don't like contact you about everything. So in short, a lot of publications, like translations, I haven't been involved very much. I just know there are a few translators, a few languages in which I felt some care and love from the translator. Like from the Norwegian, she emailed me quite a lot. I mean, she was like a cis woman in her 50s or 60s, so she might have had her limitations, but I felt like she did everything she could, like literary way. But in the Italian translation, for example, it was published by the publishing house of the sister of Berlusconi. So it was already maybe not the best idea to sell it to them. But I have I accidentally knew the quality of the translation, heard about the quality of the translation, because I took lessons Italian, and the guy who gave me lessons read it, and this book turned out to be sort of put in Google Translate, and then and I know this isn't a specific answer to your question in terms of gender, but I just have to be honest about the fact that apart from the English, which I basically translated myself because I didn't trust the translator very much, it was just too difficult to know about. I don't know what's in the book because I don't know all those languages, and I can only feel some sort of care from the translator in some specific translations. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to stop here because we went over time by quite a bit. But I think it's also a testimony to like the thirst for knowledge in the room and like how important these events are. So I encourage everyone in the room to book these people and invite them to talk and to share more about their work. They're very nice. Yeah, individually or as a group, maybe you can. Yes, so I think another thing you can do to sort of support queer histories and support queer writers is put your money where your mouth is. And so we'll be selling books. Here at the back, we'll be selling the book of Alex and Tobi. There's a version in Dutch and in English, so feel free. Offer it not only to people in the community, but offer it to your uncle, you know, your liberal friends and whatnot, so they can be exposed to other perspectives than the one they're normally exposed to. And yes, once again, thank you for everyone involved. Thank you, you guys. Thank you, the host there at the back who facilitate these events, and thank you for the people who clean this local and facilitate Spui 25. Yeah, thank you all for joining.
And thank you, Leo.